How do I change the title? Come on, where's the... And hello. Go ahead and say hi in chat. Right now I'm trying to figure out how to get this thing to edit the darn settings near... I don't have an option for changing the darn title. Oh, here we go. Edit. Cheers. Making weapons. There we go. Let's refresh this. And welcome. Let me pop over to... Yeah. I'm just going to be sitting here broadcasting a bit until I get more than 2 people in the... Me. Okay. And I've got somebody that's not saying hi. Sorry, I'm trying to wait till we got at least a few people in here so I can really kick into high gear, yeah, and stuff like that. And who all is in here right now? I'm going to go ahead and pop over to here. All right. So, we have ourselves 3D Studio Max, and we are sitting ready. Okay. Well, obviously the first thing we're going to do is make ourselves the handle. And increase the height. We're going to base the standard size on the arming sword. And let's see. I realize there's no one in actually watching this right now, which is kind of sad, but what I'm going to be doing 13. I'm right now making a cylinder that will be the handle. Excuse me, I got hiccups. Now, I'm using these other swords basically as, you know, just size comparison, so I can make sure I get things about the same proportions, because you really, you know, it's better that way. Editable Poly. And we're going to zoom in on all of the viewports, and we're going to shrink those and increase these. The reason that does, it gives a little bit of a oomph. It may never be seen on the miniature, but it feels better. Now that we've done that, I'm going to select those edges. That's one on the top up here and one on the bottom. And I hit loop. And what that does, that selects everything that's directly connected in a straight line, which in this case is the rims. Now going down to chamfer, and that's way too much chamfer, so I drop back down, or heck, I'm just going to manually type it in. 0.001. And I mesh smooth it, and it becomes a much more rounded look. Collapse. Now, I don't like the color, so I'm going to want something a bit more visible, so we go to pale blue. Okay. Now the next thing is that there's actually several different pommel shapes we could do, and I think on this one I'm going to go for I'm going to make it Celtic style. I'm going to make the whole, the weapon and, you know, this of course the handguard, more Celtic styled. Now what that means is there's a particular type of Celtic sword that the handle is human form, with the arms and head basically being the pommel, and the legs popping out to be the guard. We won't discuss what the blade is. Yeah, that's an actual Celtic style. So I'm going to start with a spear as the pommel. The reason for this is that, well, it's the closest thing to a head. Spear. Actually, let's go ahead and put it this way. Not quite so big. Yeah, and that's too many polygons. What we do is, instead of 32, it's going to be 16. No, that's still too much. 12. Yeah, there we go. The thing is, because this is a miniature, because it is going to be very, very, very small, a lot of the differences are going to be almost non-existent. Now the reason I'm stretching that deep in is so that it blends easier when it comes time to blend the miniature. Now, we have the handle at negative 13x and positive 16y, or z. Now, I know most of us are used to Z as being up for those who do 3D printing, but for 3D Studio Max it has Y as up and Z as forward and back. So what we're going to do is, that's pretty good there. Alright, now I'm going to take a torus. And you'll notice I'm starting with pretty much basic geometric shapes, no matter what I do. And we're going to make the first diameter smaller. And once again, this is way too many segments. And sides 8. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and make this an editable poly and move it into position and bring it up to 15 or 16 X and Y. Now you'll notice if we look up here that there's way too much torus. We don't need this much torus, so we're going to go ahead and select the portions we do not need and delete them. The problem is now we have holes that we need to cap off. And the way we do this is we chamfer the edge just a tiny amount. Then we can select just the border again by using this selection option, and we collapse it. And what this does, let's go ahead and hide our human and go to wireframe here. This lets us, basically we now have triangles on the cap. We created a cap of triangles. I'm going to do the same thing to the other one, but I'm going to do something slightly different afterwards. See, the thing is, we can't do an actual Celtic style hilt really well at the size that we're dealing with. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to cheat it a little bit. Now, I'm going to select one of these, and we're going to select ring. Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, so I'm going to close up on it, and I'm going to select right here. There, okay. And we're going to connect them a little wide. Now when I control click the vertex button, anything I had selected is now selected by vertex. I select that too and push it out a bit, shrink down to this and push it out a little bit. Now I'm going to select these, go back to smooth highlights, and hello Outcast. Yes, I am making weapons. I'm going to extrude these polygons. Oh wow, they went sky high, but that's not what I want them to do. I want them to go out in the direction of what's called their normals. Normals are the direction that, if it was fully smoothed, the direction that the corners of each vertex would be pointing. Now, that's good enough. And then pull it out just a little bit. I then hit smooth. What this does not make it smoother in actuality, it just smooths the shading. Collapse it. And now that I'm looking at it, what I really need to do is, it's sticking out too far behind the hand. So I take both of them, and I slide them in a little bit. And this one, I'm actually going to slide it in a lot. And there we go. That blends it into one. Now, I am now going to be, basically, I'm going to be mirroring this portion, the purple portion, but to do that I have to move the joint center from negative 15.351 to flat out negative 0.15.0. Oh, sorry, negative 13. There. Now, I copy it. And now I select both of these, or all three of those, and I apply what's called a mesh smooth. Okay, Now I'm going to select the guard, and I'm going to attach the other part. The reason being is because I'm now going to mirror it this way. Copy. I'm going to take it out to here. Select this version, delete it. And now I'm going to pull it out a bit. Now I'm going to mirror it again. And we have the handle and guard for a more Celtic style sword. Now the thing is, I can't just copy the blade over. Let me go ahead and select the handle, and I'm going to attach the rest of these pieces. Now the reason why nothing happens when I try and click on the person is because I've got him frozen. Now, welcome back with cookies. Try and drag more people in. The next thing that's going to be is I'm going to make the blade, and like I said, I can't use just the blade that's over here because Celtic swords had an unusual blade shape. It was what's called a leaf blade. It moves in slightly and then back out and then comes to a point. I actually used that blade on the spears, but it was more commonly seen on the spears later period. So the next thing we do is we make our blade. Now what we're going to do for that is we're going to use a box. Just a box. I'm going to move it into position before we actually start shaping it. And what we can see is, first of all, it's too small in this in terms of X to Y. We also need to make it wider. Not wider. Need to give it a second line. Now what we're going to do is we're going to extend it until it's just barely bigger. Okay. There's other issues, but we'll deal with them in a minute. Alright. You can see the shadow, the edges of the three different sword sizes. This is a longsword, this is arming sword, this is shortsword. Longsword is also called a war sword. It's not what D&D calls a longsword, it's what D&D calls a bastard sword. Bastard sword is a specific version, but it's a war sword, or a longsword. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the height until it's the size of the arming sword. And we need to give it at least 1, 2, 3, 4 more height segments. 1, 2, up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now we convert it to an editable poly. We're going to take this and we're going to pull it into there. Now, if we look, it's the right thickness, but the handle's not the right thickness. I don't want to change the blade thickness, so what we're going to do is we're going to change this. I'm going to select those those 4 vertices. Actually, it's more than that. It's probably 6. Yeah, 6 vertices. I'm going to go down here to soft selection. What this does is it takes where you selected and it allows you to select those related to it in the rough same area. Now, I have to make it bigger. Those are the 2 I need to do. those. And now when I make it bigger, it goes above the height of the center of the sword, which is what I want. And I can get back to working on the blade. Now the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to select those vertices. I'm going to press F12, and it's going to be an X scale of 0, turning it into a point. Although, as we can see here, it's not a point. I'm going to weld that. Now, I'm going to select all of these points on each side plus the tip. I'm not going to shrink them to 0 and weld them. Instead, I'm going to shrink them very, very small. And this gives us a diamond-shaped cross-section. Once again, I'm going to hide Mr. Redman. Now, we notice that the edge is sharp, but that it's shading over the center piece. Well, before we do anything to that is we've got to take these and bring them back this way, because these we're going to narrow a bit. And it gets the shape we want. Now, we're going to select that line. We're going to loop. And we have it going all the way around. Now what that's for is by giving it a very, very small space between 0.001, it sharpens that shading. That's why the edges also have a sharp shading, because they've got a very, very small row of polygons. Now, looking at it, it looks like these are a little bit too... Let's shrink them down a bit. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to select all of these edges here, well, except for those. That's the back of the blade, and we're going to give it a chamfer. Again, that really, really tiny chamfer. Now, that's the basic blade, but it looks a lot cruder than the others. So I hit Mesh Smooth once, two levels, and you can see it's a lot smoother. However, it's not leafy enough to be really noticed as such at the miniature level. So I'm going to turn these on. First things first is I'm going to make it a little bit thinner. And this one is going to go a little bit wider. Now, in the real world, a sword shaped like that would be way too difficult to hold. It would be huge. It would be a freaking paddle. You know, that's one of the things that people complain about Skyrim for, is the paddle swords. But the problem with this is, same thing as with the hands and other aspects of the miniature proportions, you can't use real world proportions in a weapon. The reason being is it wouldn't look right. It would be either too small, you know, so thin that you really couldn't even print it. I mean, in a 28mm miniature, a rapier would be almost as thin as a needle. You don't want something like that. Now, collapse all, and we have ourselves the basic geo for a Celtic style arming sword, or if you prefer, Elven style. And now the thing is, with this sword, that won't fit in the hand properly of the miniature. What the red shows is the default unposed version of the character. So what we're going to do is we have to rotate it 45 degrees. Zoom in. To be aligned with the arm. We then, once again, we're going to have to move. Really needs to be at negative 13.228 to be aligned with the hand properly when it closes. Then we effect pivot. -0. Put the pivot in the middle. The reason for this is, now we do this, and we have the other sword. We now have swords for right and left hand. Because some characters might be left-handed, others might be dual-wield. Who knows? Now there's a problem. The way it makes the mirrored image version is it basically scales it negative 100%. What that means is vertexes that are like this end up like that. The problem with this is that when I try to freeze it, all the normals are inside out. That means all of the faces are facing inward instead of outward. So we hit normal, and it reverses the normals right here. Collapse all, and we have our Celtic arming swords. We're going to go ahead and export these two one at a time. Then I'm going to show you how I modify them to get Longsword and Shortsword. File, export selected, and 3D printing home, meshes, free sculpt miniatures, props, and we're going to move OBJ format. That's going to be arming sword Celtic L hand, left hand. Real quick, I gotta pop this open to make sure I've got it correct. This is props old. The arming sword had a capital S. And then this one, file, export selected. This is the same thing, but we're just going to change the L to an R. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and delete the left-hand sword, because what we're going to be doing is probably better done on just one sword at a time. Now the easiest way to do the short sword, and it's really easy, is to just go ahead and select just that last little vertex. And we're going back and we're adjusting, excuse me, the range that it selects. We're going to try to blend it back as far, oh, too much, as far close to the hilt as possible. And then just simply pull it back until it's the same length as the already existing short sword. And hey, short sword. And I'm going to mirror it. Copy. And then once again I'm going to reset the mesh and flip the normals. And I have the short sword. Now, when I export this, unlike the arming sword, the S was not capitalized. So Shortsword Celtic L hand. Export. File. Export selected. Choose it, and once again change that L to an R. Save. Yay. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and I can't undo anymore. So I'm going to have to go ahead once again, select just that last vertex, but this time I've got to reduce the amount, because at this much, yeah, there we go, and extend the blade until it's right about the same length as the other longsword. The other thing about a longsword is that it's got a longer handle. So I select the pommel and pull it out. I want the handle to be as long. Brings it to here. And we have our Celtic longsword. Once again, I'm going to mirror it. Okay. Reset selected and normal. We have our twin Celtic longswords, or war swords, or whatever you want to call them. Now, they're not actual Celtic because the Celts used bronze. They couldn't make longswords because a longsword made out of bronze this size would not hold its own weight in the foundering process, because you did use a foundry. You melted bronze into a mold. You didn't forge it. Although, slight historical side note: after you poured your bronze sword into the mold and it had cooled, you would then take a hammer to the bronze. This is what's called work hardening, and it would make just the edge really hard. Now, it wouldn't be as hard as steel, but it would still be able to make a sharp tool or a sharp weapon. Not something that could cut through medieval armor, but definitely something that could be a threat to someone in more primitive forms of armor. So, we export once again. Longsword Celtic left hand. Export. Done. And then file. Export. Selected. Longsword Celtic R hand. Export. Done. Now, yes, that was 3D Studio Max 2011. Yes, I've had it for quite some time. And that was basically how I make the weapons. I'm going to be doing another weapon for those who come later. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pop over to Studio. I've already got, as you can see, the base figure loaded. And these green pictures here are the other weapons and props that I've made for it that are basically fantasy. I also have some sci-fi weapons, a beam sword, a las pistol, and a, what I think is the funniest one, the little ray gun, little sci-fi fantasy ray gun. I'm deleting that, and then what I do is I take it, edit, figure, 0 figure. Now, these swords are going to be, they have the handles are roughly the same size and shape as the ones on the arming swords and the pre-existing weapons. So I'm going to load them in and delete those. Wow, the hands are already posed. I don't have to worry about it. So let's load in, import the left-hand arming sword. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and I grab the arming sword, I drag it up to where the left hand is. And now, if I twisted the arm, well, whoops. If I twisted the arm, the sword goes with it. It's attached to the hand. But that's not enough. Now I have to save it to my library. That's what this is. This is the content library. It's kind of hard to read, but it's right here. Outcast, there is a reason. This software costs $3,500. It took me a while to save up for it, and I use it for my work every day. The more recent versions are not perpetual license. If you buy 3D Studio Max 2018, you rent it. You pay like $300 every month. $300 every month. Admittedly, you get updates, bang, 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 bang. But that's $300 every month. I used to wait, like, I'd purchase every 3 to 4 years. For one, 3D Studio Max had a problem of, for a while there, every other yearly update was buggy. So you'd skip updates, so to speak. Now, I'll say this, Outcast, the way that it's being handled by Substance is good. With Substance, you have your choice. You can either buy it outright or pay the monthly fee. Also, for every month you pay on the monthly fee, you're saving up points. And when you have enough, you buy a license outright. And as long as you're paying the monthly fee, you're getting the constant updates on the software. Okay. Now we go back. Let me go back to this. File, save as, support asset, a prop. And this is going into props, and this is the arming sword Celtic L hand. Save. And where it says product, this is basically what subdirectory for the data, and I'm putting miniatures. And you'll notice now that down here there's a new thumbnail, arming sword Celtic. From now on, if I had the base figure selected and I clicked on that, it would load the sword into the hand, but it would not pose the hand automatically. So now I have to select everything from the hand through the fingers to the sword. Yay, shift click. This time I save it as what's called a wearable preset. And I save it over top of the original. So I'm going to sort by date, arming sword Celtic left hand. Yes, I want to overwrite it. The node, the arming sword, is what's going to be loaded in by this, and then it will pose based on what body parts I select. So I'm closing the neck, and I click on the right hand, and everything that's left hand, everything that's a child of left hand gets selected. I accept, and that's it. Edit figure 0 figure. Now I load in the arming sword Celtic, and you notice the hand pose changed with it because it saved that. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll load in the right-hand arming sword just so I can have the hands posed. Now I'm going to import, oh, wrong, that was export, file, import, arming sword Celtic right hand. And right now, it's not connected. Edit figure, and just by doing that I screwed up. So 0 figure, load in the arming sword right hand again, but this one I delete. I grab the arming sword Celtic and attach it to the right hand. Now I file, save as, support asset, figure prop assets, and save it the same but with an R for right hand instead. And I save this as miniatures. Now I have to go ahead and select the hand again, right click through the sword, file, save as, wearables. I select the right hand and go through the same procedure I did before. Include the pose, uncheck everything, expand it all, close the neck, but now I only have to choose the right hand, accept, and it saves. Now not every prop does that. Not all the additions. For example, the quiver. It doesn't affect anything on the back. So since it doesn't have to change any poses. Oh, however, if I don't have the figure loaded, when I select and load it in, it doesn't go anywhere. But I have the figure selected. Instead, when I load it in, it goes right to where it's supposed to be. So, for example, this is parented to the chest. So if I move the chest, you can see it, no matter what I do with it, it goes with it. Even if I do all these horrendously impossible, oh my god, my back! Oh my god! So let's go ahead and zero the figure. And that's that. Now, I have added in a couple other bits and baubles, and I have recently added in some sci-fi bits and baubles, including, the ray gun and all that. They have a slightly different hand. Let me load in the ray gun right hand and delete it. You'll notice that instead of being a simple fist, the hand's actually slightly angled. When I get it nice and straight, the hand's angled. That's because that's the way that most firearms are. You're not holding a perfectly vertical to the weapon unless you're using a mini Uzi, an Uzi or a Mac-10, and even those have an interesting shape to them. Instead, you're holding the handle at a slight angle, about a 15 to 20 degree angle. And 6 more years of Autodesk student license is good. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get some soda real quick. Interesting, huh? Yes, I like this. Now, the next thing I'm going to make is going to be a new form of axe. So I'm going to select these swords and delete them. I'm going to import 3D printing home, meshes, free sculpt minis, props, old. I'm going to load in the hand axe. But the hand axe, I don't want to keep the head of the axe, because that's what the shaft, you know, an axe is an axe. An axe handle is an axe handle, so we're gonna keep this. Once again, we can't put too much detail on it because it would either become too weak, or it really doesn't matter. So delete the head, and effect pivot center to the object. Now, let's change the color of this to make it a brown. Or tan. Tan will do. And here we come upon another issue, and that's finding inspiration. Well, fortunately for me, I actually do have a good bit of inspiration pictures. Unfortunately, right now I can't really pull them up. But what I can do is I can go ahead and select the picture and start cycling through until I find one that might be an interesting set of inspiration. Now the problem with this is that a lot of the things that are good for inspiration wouldn't be good, you know, while they may be realistic, they wouldn't necessarily be good for making a miniature, for the same reasons I've said before. And some of these inspiration pictures I have would be more good for a great axe than a one-handed axe. Oh, here we go. Here's an interesting looking one. Let me go ahead and add source. Let me pull it up and show you. Alright. Storage. Axes. This is Elf Axe. This is how I saved it. This would make an interesting axe, don't you think? That's one possibility. Now we're making a single-handed axe. We're not making a great axe. So I've got to go right past some of these. And a true Nordic bearded axe, well, it would end up being too weak. Now, the thing is about these reference images, like that Elven axe, is we don't want to make an exact copy. We don't, because there's the whole issue of copyright. Instead, we want to use it as inspiration, as ideas. So I'm looking for some other interesting ones. Ones that would probably work for, you know, ideas and inspiration, but not be too meh. And I'm not finding many on my nice little yeah. I'm finding a whole bunch of great axes, or ones that are too fancy and skinny to actually work as a, well, as a miniature axe. So let's go ahead and find one more, just one more sample. Oh yay, oh yay. lot of them. Alright. That could be interesting. Okay. And hello, Baloo! Yes, basically I am going to be making weapons, and right now we're trying to find a decent sample of reference images. Now, like I said, these are not going to be exact, these are going to be inspired by. I kind of like the top one on this one. And that's where I have my two primary sources. And then that is this, the top one up here, and the Elven style to the right. Like I said, the Elven style won't be exactly like that. I'll just basically take the idea of a bird of some kind where the wing is the axe. And the other is just a straight up dwarven style, bearded, like fantasy Nordic bearded axe type. So I'm going to go ahead and close these two little pictures here. And it will end up being a one-handed axe on a miniature. So about yay big. Okay, Brandon, have a good one. Now we have 3D Studio Max. I'm probably going to do something closer to the eagle. Now, because of the way he's going to be handled, the axe head will be off to this side. A lot smaller, and it's going to have like a little, the eagle head here. We're going to start off with the box. Yay, a box. If I fits, I sits, box. And that's about right. Yep. And I had not changed any of the numbers since we made the Celtic style swords, so I better do that now. And we only want one segment per section. Make it a little bit taller, just a little bit, and it needs to be at 13.228 and 15.999. No, wait, no, this one's not. Okay, this one's at 13.13 and 15.9. 13.13 and 15.90. And there. Now, go ahead and peek in. 28 millimeter, actually. So, I mean, just as an example, you've got good old 28 millimeter elf. He's a little bit taller than the average, but that's because he's taller than humans. If we measure to his eye, which is how you measure the height of a miniature, from the base to the eye. Yes, I have complete garbage calipers. He's 32 millimeters. That makes him, 4 millimeters taller, or about 6 or 7 inches taller than the average human, which fits my game world. Yes, when you talk about 25 millimeter or 28 millimeter miniatures, you're not talking about to the top of the head, you're talking about to the eye. Don't ask me why, it's stupid. I know, but hey. Now, let's go back into 3D Studio Max. We're going to reselect that square. Now, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to convert it to an Editable Poly. That way we can, actually edit this. Select that, and now we have just one polygon selected. we're going to extrude it out. And it's a bit too far. 1, 2, 3. Now from here we're just going to move vertexes. So I need to select, move to that. That's a bit too big. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this shorter. We're going to bring all of these in and just once again maneuver the vertexes until they're in position. It doesn't need to be too small because then it's too small for the printers to really capture right. But it does need to be, you know, smaller than what it was because it wouldn't look right even at the scale. Yeah. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select that polygon. And this is going to make kind of a swooping up. Excuse me. So we're going to extrude it a lot further out. Then we're going to select that. And then we're going to give it a couple extra cross sections. 1, 2, 3. That's good enough. We're going to select these and we're going to go to bend. Now, we give it just an example bend. Oh, that's definitely the wrong direction. What about this? Nope. And if we take it X, there we go. That's what we want. So we X bend it, collapse. We have those polygons selected. We're going to go ahead and rotate them. And we're going to move it to here. And so now we have, well, as you can see, that would be the head and the top of the wing. Once again, we're only taking inspiration from that reference picture, not exact. Now, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and select some of these vertexes and hit loop, and it selects that entire inside edge. We're going to select that. Now, the reason I did that was because when I did this, I selected not only these two edges here, but I also selected the corner edge. But I don't want those. So now, if I turn on the edged faces, you can see I have selected all of those faces around the inside edge. And I'm going to give them, well, a very small, I said small chamfer. So small that you really can't see it. And then I'm going to take all of them this way and give them one additional edge loop. What that's for, that helps me control how smooth something becomes when I subdivide it. This gives it smooth shading. You can get a vague idea that it's going to be sharper around the bottom edge than it is the top. I apply a subdivision and one more level will give it nice and make it nice and sharp. There we go. And then collapse all. I actually think I'm going to give it a slight tilt. Effect pivot. And we're going to move it up to the center. And rotate it a little. That's good. Sorry about that. Sadly, you have to have multiple views and constantly moving it around so you can see what you need to see. I've got temporarily paused the actual modeling for a second. Now, what you're going to see is right around here, I'm going to have the axe coming out from here and swooping up in like a peak almost. So the way to do that, I'm going to go ahead and make another box. Yes, a box. But the box is actually coming from down here. Now, first thing I do is let's go ahead and give it quite a few sections. Editable Poly. Now I need to make the height 15.9. The X doesn't matter because it's not centered. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and move these out of the way. And one by one, I'm going to take each one of these right-hand segments and place them inside the green portion. And I'm going to try to follow the curve as much as possible. The reason for this is because we want the geometry to be intersecting at this point in time. When it comes time to actually prepare the model for 3D printing, because I'm taking it out of ZBrush, it will automatically fuse it into a manifold surface. I think everyone that's currently in here is deals with 3D printing, so you understand the importance of a manifold surface. Okay. If there's anyone in here that's not from 3D printing, the importance of a manifold surface is basically it's easier for the slicer, which is what prepares the model for the actual printing, to determine where it should go next. An empty, hollow surface confuses the slicers. Well, they're better at it now than they used to be, but still. And it ends up having problems and ends up having errors in the slicing process. Okay. Now, that's the general shape of the axe, but it's not sharp. So, we're going to go ahead and select as many of the polygons as I properly can, and then unselect the ones on the flats. There. Now the edge, and only the edge, is selected. Extrude, local normal. And that gives us a bit of a curve, but that's way too far. There we go. And the one thing we're going to change is these last couple, we want them to be as straight out from there as possible. Now, we take those edges, you notice that it's still the only ones that are selected, and we're going to shrink them quite a bit, but only vertically. And this is the same reason as before. It gives it a nice sharp edge when we give it a smooth shading. Now we need to give the rest of the sides of the axe this smooth shading, So what we're going to do is we're going to select here. Oh, I forgot to make it selecting edges. We're going to select these edges. Come on, there we go. And these edges, but then we're going to unselect the ones on the very cutting edge. Loop. And we're going to chamfer them 0.001. And what that does is that gives it a nice sharp edge where it needs to have them. I then hit mesh smooth twice. Oh dear, it's not that sharp of an edge. It's not what I would want. So it's undo that, and what we need to do is we need to put in one more edge right in here. I select those edges. I've been saying the word edge a lot lately. And I click ring, and it selects the whole ring. Now I'm going to connect all of those, putting one more edge in the middle. And you may have seen that these areas here got a little bit sharper. Now when I hit mesh smooth twice, that's a really nice sharp bevel seam, you might say. Okay, now that's a bit large for a hand axe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent. I'm going to attach the blade to the body. And I don't want it too much narrower overall, but I can shrink that. Now, the problem is it now looks a lot longer than the previous axe. So what I do is I bring it down, so it's about the same length, and the handle's long now, so I go ahead and select those and slide it down. Let's give it a mesh smooth because I didn't have one on that one before. Now I attach the blade. And just because, let's go ahead and I'm going to make the outer body a little bit thicker to make it more distinct and clearer that we have a change right there. And that is the new axe. As I did with the sword, I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees to align the direction of motion for the axe with the arm. I'm going to go ahead and move the center to 0 so that I can mirror it. I then reset selected, and oh look, it turned black. For those who weren't here earlier, that's what it does, because when it scales, it actually, when it mirrors, it's actually scaling negative 100%, so vertexes swap positions. So I gotta flip those normals. And that's the Elven axe. It's a lot more stylized than the one that we were looking at before. And we go ahead, select this one, file, export selected. What are we going to call this one? The previous one was simply hand axe. So let's call it hand axe Elven L hand. The reason I'm doing that is because I want all of the hand axes in roughly the same spot, all of the long swords in roughly the same spot, you know, whether it's divided by hand, you know, left, right, but it's in order like that. So file, export, and that's going to be the hand axe Elven R hand. And save. Export. Done. And okay. Now that we have that done, that's the basic how I make the weapons. Like I said, y'all just saw me making a leaf-bladed Celtic style sword and a stylized elven axe. Yeah. Now, basically, that's what I do for almost all of the weapons. I make a very basic, very simplistic and cartoonized version. Because, like I said, if I made an exact copy of this, the guard alone would be too small to be seen. The pommel would be a tiny little blob, and the blade would be too thin to print. I mean, even flat on, the blade would barely be big enough to print, and this would look like a rapier, not a broadsword. Put zombie killer back up. And it looks like I have a visitor coming by to say hi. Yeah, I do. Oh. Let me get my glasses on so I can actually see what you're saying, since I'm kind of stuck back here now. Yeah. Anyway. So. What are you doing? Oof. Now my plan is right now I've got at least a basic version of every fantasy medieval weapon. What are you doing? At least one. Yeah. How many cats do you know that let you do this and enjoy it like this? It's a happy little kitty. No, you can't have the microphone. So, I'm down to 2 people. No. Anyway. Yes. Like I said, I'm planning on making... I've got at least one of every major type of medieval fantasy weapon. And I've got quite a few sci-fi weapons already. You know, rifle, pistol, lasgun, ray gun, shotgun. I plan on making multiple variations of each type of weapon. So that if need be, I can... like, if I'm making an elf, his sword would look more like what an elf would use. If I'm making an orc, his sword would be cruder and more orky. And Shinju did not like the fact that I was playing with Carlton. So now she's got to snuffle my hands. Yes. Stretch, kitty kitty. So headbutt. Yes, good kitty. Anyway. Hey, Shinji. Come here. Or not. You're too sleepy. Anyway, so eventually I will have multiple types of each weapon, and that will make things easier. When it comes to that axe, for example, let's say I made a whole unit of Elven warriors holding that hand axe and a shield. When it came time to make the commander, you'd still use the same axe, but when I brought it into ZBrush, I detailed the swoop a bit more, maybe grab it, some of it and make it a little bit bigger, a little bit nastier looking. Who knows? It is also 10:55. I have been broadcasting for 138,000 frames. Wow. So anyway, this coming Sunday, I will probably be just leaving it open and up for you guys to decide what I'm going to make. Although I do remember at least one person made the comment about wanting to see a deep one. So it will be this Sunday, 8 Central Time. I probably won't stream again until then, but I don't know. Because I know tomorrow night I've got my game night. The Thursday and Friday I've got errands to run, and Saturday, well, it's Saturday. It's alright for fighting. Hey. Anyway, Shinju here. He's 12. Yay. So are y'all gonna be making it on to watch the Sunday stream? That's a serious delay Twitch has. Probably. Excellent. So, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and close my stream here. Like I said, I had a decent amount of work done. I'm probably between now and then I'm going to go ahead and load in those other. Yep. Between now and then, I'm going to load in those other props and prepare them for, auto loading like you saw. I'm also going to create the new thumbnails where they look green. Yeah. The reason the thumbnails will look green is because a lot of miniatures back in the 80s and 90s and probably up through today were sculpted out of a green putty. Simply called green stuff. Comes in a ribbon with yellow on one side, green on the other. You snip a bit off, you mix it up, and you've got about an hour to 2 to work and 24 hours to cure. But you can speed up the cure by sticking it in a coffee can and getting a desk lamp with an old style, regular old light bulb, putting it over, and it basically cooks it. So you can finish. It takes a full day to sculpt a single miniature. And that's assuming you don't have any problems. Yeah, about 30-45 seconds. That's about right. Don't forget, my reception gets lagged out when I've got DAZ Studio, 3D Studio Max, ZBrush, Craftware all open and running while I've got the broadcast going. So, we'll see you all later.